With the recent National Association of Realtors settlement, there has been a lot of questions and anxieties about what's to come as we navigate the current housing market. While some have taken this as an opportunity to capitalize on a moment of uncertainty and sow doubt among consumers and agents, I wanted to sit down with a local expert to cut through the noise and get a better understanding of what this could mean for all of us.
Hi, my name is Devin Martinez. I am a real estate broker in Northern Colorado. I've been in the real estate industry since the late 90s. Started as an appraiser, then moved into real estate sales. Worked at one of the larger brokerage firms in town here in Fort Collins for 7 years, and then started my business, which is Navigate Residential, in 2011. Yeah, so we get asked this question a lot. What is the settlement? One of the difficulties with answering that question is that there are a lot of pieces to it and a lot of things that I don't know that people really need to know or understand. I'm going to read a couple things out of one of the best books I have ever read, one of the best books anybody has ever read, and it might help give some perspective on this. So this is Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Doren. So one of the things they say in this book, How to Read a Book, is we do not have to know everything about something in order to understand it. Too many facts are often as much an obstacle to understanding as too few. There is a sense in which we moderns are inundated with facts to the detriment of understanding. There are a lot of videos that go into the many, many details of this, but to me, there are a few details that are important to know, and then everything else to me can kind of fall by the wayside for now anyway. This started when a group of homeowners filed a lawsuit claiming that they didn't know or didn't understand that they didn't have to pay the buyer's agent. So they knew they were paying the real estate agent to sell their home. They either didn't know or didn't understand that it was an option not to pay the buyer's agent. That's how it started. It's spread from there, but that's where this began. For years, the convention has been that the seller pays the fee for their agent and the buyer's agent. It didn't have to be that way. It never had to be that way, but that became the convention. Now what's happening is almost a forced decoupling of these commissions. Now, even if this all goes through, and it hasn't as of when we're recording this, but if it does, it doesn't mean that the seller can't pay the buyer's agent's commission. It's just going to be easier for them not to. My personal feelings, my personal feelings start with value and how you think about value. Value is an easy word to throw around, and every agent, especially if they're at one of the larger companies, has any number of scripts and sales techniques to present their value and to sell their value. If you're asking my personal opinion, most of these things you hear are platitudes. They don't mean much of anything. My personal opinion is that I think this is good. I think it's good for questions to be asked, and I think it's good for agents to have to think about what creates value and what makes them valuable to buyers and sellers. I don't think that that has been part of the fabric of what I do for a long time. It's been more about sales and more about techniques on convincing people that they're valuable and more about statistics. And who was it that said, lies, damn lies, and statistics? I think it was Mark Twain that said that long ago. It was at least attributed to Mark Twain. You can make statistics look like anything you want, and you can use platitudes to say anything you want, and they may be believed if people aren't paying attention. So my personal opinion is that take away what is actually happening, but if it turns out that buyers and sellers are now asking better questions and paying attention to the answers, then I think it's a very good thing. Let's see, so how does it change the buying process? How does it change the selling process? Well, first of all, we don't know exactly. We don't know how this will play out. I suspect in some amount of time, maybe 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year, at some point after all of this goes into effect, there will be new conventions. There will be new norms to how this industry works. I have no idea what those norms and conventions will look like, but I can tell you in the short term, there's going to be some confusion. One of the changes being made is that now when a real estate agent works with a buyer, they will have an agreement that states exactly what that agent is going to make. And it can't change as far as I know. It can't be based on what the seller is willing to pay. It could be that the convention becomes again that sellers pay this commission. But if that's going to be the case, there's going to have to be some working around other new rules. For example, as it is right now, as a real estate agent, when I'm looking for homes for a buyer, I can see the commission that will be paid. One of the new changes is that that's going away. We won't know what a seller is going to pay. I think there are going to be ways around that, but the spirit of this lawsuit and this settlement is that agents not know the commission offered by the seller. That's one of the reasons why the buyer is going to have to agree up front to what they pay. Let's talk about the extremes of some of the things that are being bandied about. I don't know that these things are commonplace, but I think it makes sense to address them. For example, the way it's been for a long time is you have these MLS services. MLS stands for Multiple Listing Service. This is where the listing goes, for example, when it is going to hit the market. There's a system where you input the information and then it gets sent out to the world, to Zillow, to Realtor.com, all these other places. As long as these MLS services have been around, as agents, we've been able to see the commission that will be paid if we sell this home. Now, where I operate in northern Colorado, I don't know anybody personally that won't show a home or that will show a home based on the commission. I am absolutely certain that it happens, and maybe there are markets where it's more prevalent. Where I work, I don't see it often, but that is one of the problems and one of the reasons that this lawsuit is important, is that buyers were potentially not seeing properties that they would have otherwise because of the commission or reduced commission or no commission that the seller was willing to pay. Okay, so if I had to offer advice to somebody, if it was my mother, for example, or my best friend or one of my siblings, very generally I would suggest that they ask a lot of questions. And very generally, if the agent that they're talking to seems impatient or is very obviously relying on sales techniques or platitudes and is not answering your questions, then I would end the conversation and move on to somebody else. And if you can't find somebody to really explain to you why you should use them and why there is value in using them, then I would pay as little as possible. As far as the selling process goes, not much will change practically. As far as I know, there are no new forms, as opposed to the buyer side where there's a new agreement where the buyer has to agree to pay this negotiated amount to the buyer's agent. So let's see, why would the seller want to pay the buyer's agent's commission? A lot of this is going to come down to supply and demand. It's going to come down to how much leverage the seller has, frankly. If they get one offer and it's been on the market for 3 months and that offer is pretty good and that offer is asking them to pay the buyer's agent's commission, then it might make sense to pay the buyer's agent's commission. But if there are multiple offers, well, then the seller has options, of course. It will come down to the same things it always comes down to, at least if they were to ask me. If I'm selling a home and they're asking me my opinion and we have multiple offers, yes, it's going to be a matter of the net amount that they receive from this offer, but there are also still other factors. Do we feel the buyer is stable and are they in it for the long haul? Are they going to close? There are a lot of other things to measure, but if we're just talking about this new environment, it really isn't going to change that much for sellers because it's still going to come down to the bottom line for them. And in that way, I don't think it changes much. The way all of this got started was a group of sellers filing a lawsuit because they either didn't know that they didn't have to pay the buyer's agent's commission, or they didn't know that it was negotiable, or in some cases maybe didn't know that they were paying it. The problem is that this way of doing business has become the norm to such an extent that real estate agents aren't communicating the things that need to be communicated. One, that all commission is negotiable. Two, that the seller does not have to pay the buyer's agent, and even that's negotiable. I think as an industry, we've become lazy in these communications. At best, I think that's what's happening. At worst, again, and I think this is an extreme, but at worst, you would have agents that would present it as if it had to be this way. I don't know anybody like that, but I can imagine that it happens. In this way, because of these things, I do think that the lawsuit and everything that is resulting from it is a good thing. It's bringing all of this to light, and it means that we're going to have conversations about these things, and I think that's good. They need a good agent that's going to help them understand not just what it comes down to in terms of money, but what it comes down to in terms of other risks and rewards. For me, and for the folks that work with me, it comes down to, and I've said this many, many times, maybe only once on this video, but I say this over and over, it comes down to how we think about this process and how we think about value, and then how we communicate that value. Our job is to understand this in terms of a dynamic way. There are so many moving pieces. You have different personalities, you have different markets, you have people that communicate better and worse on the other side. And so this is not just about real estate. You can talk to somebody who's been in real estate for 30 years and they may be able to perfectly explain this lawsuit. But if you're looking for my advice, and if I was talking to my own mother, I would be paying attention to what they're saying about this process in general. Are they aware that there are many variables involved in a real estate transaction? And are they interested in how these variables respond and move with each other? If I were talking to a seller the day that all of these changes went into place, and we had no history, we didn't know what was going to happen, we didn't know how the market would respond to these in general, and it's brand new, I would look for an agent that understands the possible risks, the possible rewards of offering commission to the buyer's agent or not offering commission to the buyer's agent. And I think I would look for an agent who understands and who is adept at dealing with fluid situations. Because it might be that you list your home thinking that this is the best way to do it, but we may quickly find out that, gosh, you know what? We need to pivot and do it this way. I think in the short term, you need somebody who is aware that it's fluid. If you're talking to somebody that is too rigid in their thinking, that would scare me. I would pay attention to how they present it. And if they present anything as an absolute other than the actual law, then I would interview somebody else. So do I have any last thoughts? I do. And allow me to go back to how to read a book here. I'm going to read something and then I'll explain it. The mistake here is to suppose that receiving communication is like receiving a blow or a judgment from the court. On the contrary, the reader or listener is much more like the catcher in a game of baseball. Catching the ball is just as much an activity as pitching or hitting it. So what Adler is saying here is that there is a responsibility of the person receiving the communication to do some work, basically. It's an active process. I don't think anybody would argue that our culture has become one that wants quick answers. We want quick clips. We don't want to have to take the time to think much about things. We want it to be fast. I think that there is a responsibility on buyers and sellers not only to ask good, probing questions, but to pay attention to the answers. For example, I believe, and anybody that works with me will be forced to believe, that it's on us to communicate our value. And again, it's also on us to think about value and what that means for the buyer and the seller. I believe that we can explain that value fully to the buyer or the seller, but it doesn't always come in 10-second clips or 30-second clips. It's on us to make these communications as succinct as possible, but some things are difficult to understand immediately. So there is a responsibility of the buyer and the seller to pay attention and to want good information. I think that's important, and I don't believe it's something that anybody has talked much about.